From the Chesapeake Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental reporting, this is Chesapeake Uncharted, the podcast that uncovers stories about the bay, its interconnected ecosystem, and the people who rely on them. I'm Jeremy Cox. On today's episode,
we have Congresswoman Aloria here, and Greg Williams from the Army Corps of Engineers. So Senator Kane is going to start off, and he's going to speak, and then if you have any questions, he'll be happy to answer.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Hey, everybody, how y'all doing?
Hey,
doing well.
How far are we willing to go to save a place from climate change? That is the big question hanging over the proceedings on this warm August day. We have a U.S. Senator. That's Tim Kaine of Virginia. You may remember him as Hillary Clinton's running mate in her ill-fated 2016 presidential run. With him is U.S. Representative Elaine Loria, who represents southeastern Virginia. The setting is Tangier Island, a little dot of land in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay. No roads connect the island with the mainland, so the 400 people who live here have to take about an hour's boat ride if they want to go to McDonald's or grab a latte at Starbucks. The VIPs are here today on a mission to stir up support for an ambitious and expensive project to save the island from washing away.
We wanted to come today because we've been working on a priority that's been an island priority for a number of years, where it's been a hard fish to land, and we haven't quite landed it, but we think we're close, and that is significant funding to deal with erosion and sea level rise issues. I want to sort of explain why now, kind of why is it happening now, and again, we're not quite there.
Let me set the scene for you a little more here. When you think of a politician meeting with constituents, you probably picture it in some place like a VFW hall, with a podium and metal folding chairs spread out across the linoleum. But this is Tangier Island. So the senator and his House colleague are greeting about a dozen or so residents and town officials in a pavilion attached to an ice cream shop. Folks are just sitting at wooden picnic tables or benches, and Kaine is delivering his pitch in a navy polo shirt and jeans. Senator Kaine doesn't mince words. He begins by acknowledging the difficult path forward.
It's been really hard to get funding at the federal level. You can get a little bit here and a little bit there. Sometimes we'll get funding that will go to the state, and then the state can chip in money. But the mayor and I have talked over time that a lot of the federal formula, whether it's Tangier or I was in Appalachia last week, extreme rain events in hollows in Buchanan County, it's really devastating, but if it's only 100 people, it can sometimes be hard to get the attention of FEMA or other agencies to produce for smaller communities.
Basically, what it boils down to is this. If you want help from FEMA or the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with a flooding problem, you better be able to show a lot of bang for the buck. You need to show that your big investment is going to protect a large number of people or a lot of important real estate. That makes all the sense in the world from the standpoint of avoiding government waste. No one wants to fund a project that doesn't deliver results. But that means small, rural communities like Tangier Island really struggle to get funding, Kaine explained.
During the last administration, you had a president that wanted to do something, and we did too. We went to bat, but again, the formulas weren't really going to make much happen.
If you listened to Season 1 of Chesapeake Uncharted, you already know the story of Tangier Island. But if not, let's get you quickly caught up. Since the 1850s, about 2/3 of Tangier's landmass has vanished into the Chesapeake Bay. The bay itself has risen by a foot over the past century, drowning some of the lowest spots. At the same time, as part of an even longer geologic process, the land is sinking. So the problem is compounded, and erosion eats away at the island chunk by mucky chunk. People are already clearing out. The population fell by an astounding 40% between the 2010 census and the 2020 census. The reasons are complex. Most younger folks have left for better job opportunities on the mainland. The remaining residents are aging, and the island itself is dying off. Research suggests that the community's remaining dry land, and I use that term loosely, will be gone within 50 years. That is, if nothing is done. Which brings us back to that sweltering meet and greet at the ice cream shop. Kane and Luria are here to get feedback on their proposal to throw $25 million at Tangier's erosion problem. The idea is to take silt that's being dredged up from nearby shipping channels and use it to shore up Tangier's weakest points. Kane and his allies were successful in getting the money rolled into the latest version of the Senate's appropriations bill. It's not a done deal, yet, but if approved, the massive project would be a good start toward ensuring a future for the island, Kane said.
And I don't think 25 million is going to be set it and forget it and never have to worry about it again. But given that flood wall that you guys did, the partial one was 3.5 million, 25 million can do a lot of good.
Yeah. If
it's not everything, you do that, and then we talk about what other phases would be.
During this season of Chesapeake Uncharted, we're taking stock of Tropical Storm Agnes. This year marks the storm's 50th anniversary, but in many ways, the effects of Agnes are still with us. With each episode, I'm exploring how we're still living in the world Agnes created. People still live with the emotional scars. Communities from Virginia up to New York still bear physical scars, and the Chesapeake Bay still bears environmental scars. We'll talk about why this still matters today, and for our future. Well, here we are, the last episode of the season. Agnes hit the Bay region hard, especially upstream along the Susquehanna. It brought some wind and rain to Tangier Island too, but not enough to resonate in residents' memories. I wanted to come back to Tangier, though, because if you want to ponder the future of small communities pitted against the elements, you would be hard-pressed to find a better place to do it. Agnes, you'll recall, devastated the mid-Atlantic, causing billions of dollars in damage and leaving dozens of people dead. The main cause wasn't wind, but flooding, with more than a foot of rain falling in a matter of hours in some spots. Afterward, the nation began to reconsider the way it responds to natural disasters. That conversation continues today, but with even greater urgency because of climate change. The planet's warming is fueling stronger bouts of rainfall, setting up worse floods in the future, and sea level rise compounds the problem in coastal areas by raising the water table beneath our feet. We know we can't afford to save every place in harm's way. Tangier Island, therefore, represents a test to pull out all the stops or let the water win. We'll talk about that after a break. Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you in part by Greenfin Studio, a marketing and communication firm focused on coastal, environmental, and social projects. They have helped hundreds of organizations engage new audiences and reach environmental goals. If your organization wants fresh ideas to expand your reach and deliver more effective messages, check them out at greenfinstudio.com. Welcome back. On today's Chesapeake Uncharted, we're discussing whether Tangier Island in Virginia's portion of the Chesapeake Bay should be saved from erosion and rising water. When we last journeyed out here, back in Season 1, we heard from the islanders themselves. One of the main themes was that locals can't save Tangier on their own. Estimates run as high as $350 million, so they need to tap into deeper pockets with the state and, more likely, the federal government. But first, Tangier residents need to make their case that it's a fight worth winning. This time around, we're spotlighting some outside perspectives. Consider them the vanguard and the army of allies that would be required to save the island. let's meet our first one.
My name's Brian Russo. I'm a singer-songwriter and a journalist, and I live on Maryland's Eastern Shore.
So you're not from Tangier Island, right?
No, I'm from Pittsburgh, or north of Pittsburgh, in a very little town called Cabot, Pennsylvania. The first time I ever went to Tangier was, 2012, 2013.
Russo is a longtime newspaper and radio journalist. He's currently the director of production and operations for Delmarva Public Media, the national public radio affiliate on the Bay's Eastern Shore. And, full disclosure, he's a friend. But I wanted to talk to him in his musician mode. You see, Russo recently wrote and released a song called Tangier. He was telling me how the inspiration for the song came from his first visit to the island during a reporting trip about a decade ago. He was moved by the rustic beauty and charm of the place, but also by something darker.
Everyone we talked to, the people at the museum, they showed us all the great history, but then the conversation steered to, well, there's fewer students now, all the kids are leaving. There was just it was a sad nostalgia that was beautiful, but it kind of bummed me out a little bit because it just felt like this amazing place that not everybody or very few people may get to be blessed enough to go to and experience might not always be there.
I am a tugboat and son of a fisherman. The kids go to college and they never come home again. I only have nightmares about hurricanes in mainland Virginia, where things can change. They say that it's been coming for about 100 years. The life that they gave us is gonna disappear.
So that creative spark was born, and it found flame these many years later.
Yeah, and that happens with songs sometimes, especially with me. What's the old adage? Write what you know. And for this album, which I released under the band name Journos, because they're all story songs in one way or another.
Is there a line that you think resonates the most with people that you've heard, or with yourself even?
I remember the water tower when I got there.
The cross on the water tower tells me that God didn't leave. So won't you meet me by the old fishing pier?
That second verse, the cross on the water tower tells me that God didn't leave. And the line that's previous to it is, damn the scientists and all the things that they believe.
God save old Tangier.
And so that's a thing of people being frustrated that everyone's saying that it's all going to end and it's all going to end in tears, but they still believe,
Is this just a tale about Tangier, or is there a subtext there? Is it about something bigger? There's always something bigger, isn't there?
I mean, I guess the romanticizing of it is, as you do with some things, meet me by the old fishing pier. You can see the lifeboats from here. I'll kiss you so sweetly, my dear. God save old Tangier. It's a beautiful place that's maybe doesn't have a happy ending. And I think that could be the subtext of so many songs. This just happened to have climate change being a character kind of in the backdrop. And I feel like people connect with the song because it was about humans and emotions in a place rather than me standing up on some soapbox talking about an environmental issue.
Farewell to the Crockett's, the Pruitts and Parks, Stephen and Courtney Thomas pulling up to the docks. When you live on the water, you don't need a weatherman. Farewell, little island, I hope to see you again.
The song is Tangier. The band is Journos. Thank you to songwriter Brian Russo for sharing his music. Up next, we take an anthropological turn.
Tangier had been a place that I had been interested in visiting for a really long time. I went to college in Williamsburg, And I had heard about this strange little island in the middle of the bay. And I didn't actually get a chance to visit it and start studying it as an anthropologist until 2016.
Jonna Yarrington is now a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Virginia, but she lived on Tangier Island for a little over a year, from 2017 to 2018. What began almost as a lark soon became the subject of her dissertation.
It's a very interesting place to study social processes as the environment is changing, and especially because it has this long-term threat of imminent displacement. So generations who have lived there know that there's a sea level rise or a storm surge type threat to their island. And so I wanted to know how that affected their society and their culture.
Yarrington brings a fascinating perspective to Tangier. On the one hand, she got to know some of the residents and forged personal relationships with them.
It became really like a project, a passion project. You become so invested in these kinds of long-term research projects. So it really was an important part of my life, important time in my life, and a really exciting project.
On the other hand, these were research subjects. She literally has to be dispassionate about the things she's hearing. This is a good time to clarify that Yarrington isn't just an anthropologist. She's an environmental anthropologist.
And as an environmental anthropologist, I want to know how these social processes are working inside of environments, inside of ecological systems where humans live among non-human species. They live with seaweed and seagrasses and eels and crabs and oysters. And so my focus is not on those non-human external environments, but it's rather on the social processes.
This is important, Yarrington told me, because the findings can inform efforts to help the community. Basically, how do you know what they want unless you ask them? How do you know, unless you examine it, whether society on the island is on the verge of collapse? For answers to such questions, contact your nearest anthropologist. Yarrington interviewed as many residents as would talk to her. She immersed herself in the place and found it to be much more complicated than the way it's typically described in the media. Almost everyone on the island is white. Nearly everyone is politically conservative. Many bristle at the idea of climate change. It's a society that lives close to and relies on the water. You hear over and over again from residents that they don't see a difference in the height of the water, but they can see the erosion, where a sandy beach or a marsh used to be that's now fallen into the sea. Why the resistance? Yarrington pressed her sources to find out.
And what I ended up concluding about that issue is that they do believe that erosion is happening. So the end point of what that means is the same for the scientists and for the Tangiermen. The island is eroding and it's threatening their houses and their security. The fact that they refuse to call it climate change and sea level rise is a marker of identity. So it's a form of distinction for them. And that, I guess you could call it a creed, that identity that they have is connected to their other forms of identity, like religious, Protestant fundamentalism, and their religious beliefs, their political beliefs, their being Donald Trump superfans for the most part. So it's connected to their identity. It's not so much connected to the belief that their island is in trouble or not in trouble, because they all pretty much to a person will tell you the island is in trouble.
You have two parallel problems that threaten the future of Tangier Island. One is climate change. The other is the outflow of population. The census pegged the island's population at 431 people as of 2020. Yarrington keeps her own tally, and it shows that Tangier is down to just 363 residents. If you try to preserve Tangier for the future, what are you saving? Yarrington has given a lot of thought to that question over the years.
I guess what I would say, as an anthropologist with kind of a long view of history, is I would say that there's culture and history, there's language, there's life on Tangier that should at least be salvaged, that should be preserved. And so I think for that reason, the wealthiest country in the history of humans, arguably, could do what it could do to save Tangier Island.
Even if it costs millions of dollars to say for, like you said, a few hundred people.
It's a difficult thing to justify resources. And you end up, when you start monetizing projects, and especially like this is how the Army Corps functions with their budget, and with the congressional budgets, you're competing, and it becomes a question of who deserves what. And there's other places, in the Bay, there's other places in the US, there's other places in the world that are disappearing and threatened as well. So that's going to be the real challenge of coming times, I think, is the scale of the needs and who's going to be jockeying for those needs.
Everything old is new again, right? 50 years ago, public officials faced similar dilemmas in the wake of Tropical Storm Agnes. Who to protect with flood walls, and who to leave out, which parts of town to rebuild, and which parts to demolish. At the time, these decisions almost invariably turned on cold, hard economics. What could they afford to lose? What couldn't they afford to lose? Let's put a pin in this conversation for now. We'll return to it, but first, I want to take you back out to Tangier and the big political visit, the one about the $25 million lifeline. We'll do that right after this last break.
Hi, this is Laura Lutz, editor at the Chesapeake Bay Journal. I hope you're enjoying our podcast, and I'd like to invite you to join the community of Bay Journal readers. If you care about climate change, wildlife, clean air, healthy communities, and of course the Bay and its rivers, you'll find news you can use at the Bay Journal, along with some great ideas for outdoor travel. Our subscriptions are free. Check us out at bayjournal.com and click on subscribe to start receiving the best independent environmental news in the Bay region.
Hello again. On this, the final episode of our season about Tropical Storm Agnes, we have traveled halfway down the Chesapeake Bay to Tangier Island, Virginia. We've been talking this season about how Agnes ushered in a new era of flood emergencies in America. It was the most expensive tropical storm or hurricane in the nation's history. In today's dollars, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the storm inflicted $15 billion in damage. It took 16 years for that figure to be eclipsed by Hurricane Hugo in 1989. And that record lasted just 3 years when Hurricane Andrew broke it in 1992. I'm not going to list all the storms that have surpassed Andrew because there are 17 in all. Experts point to two major factors behind this trend. Population growth along the coast is putting more real estate in harm's way, but the storms themselves are trending stronger because of fossil fuel-induced climate change. I've been talking about how the best estimates measure Tangier Island's demise in decades. Maybe the 2040s or 50s or sometime beyond that. But these projections focus on sea level rise. We know, of course, that isn't the only symptom of a changing climate. A storm like Agnes could come along and wipe out Tangier Island in a matter of hours. It would be a tragedy on many levels. I hope that no loss of life comes of it, if it happens. But there are just too many recent examples where this has happened. Then many neighborhoods in New Orleans that never returned after Hurricane Katrina, and whole neighborhoods where homes were bought out in New York and New Jersey after Superstorm Sandy. Over and over again, Tangier residents have fought upstream against the narrative that their community is too small or too insignificant to save. So, when Senator Tim Kaine and Representative Elaine Luria stepped foot on the island last year, the promise of a big federal check stood out from the typical offers residents are used to hearing. Here's Luria, speaking just after Kaine.
This is a really rare opportunity, I think, that we have to try to get this large of an investment to try to help with the erosion and sea level rise here in Tangier.
Gregory Williams, one of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' top officials in the Norfolk office, came next. He pointed to how a recent Corps project, a stone jetty on the west side of the island, had greatly reduced wave action and erosion along the community's boat wharf. And he sounded almost giddy, in his bureaucratic manner, about what he could do with $25 million.
I'm excited, personally, just to have this opportunity to, beneficially use material that could be going somewhere else from a navigation channel and bringing it here to the island and placing it in a way, that benefits the island. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity. I'm very excited about it and just looking forward to getting after it. So thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, question.
Kaine announced it was time for questions. A woman in a straw hat piped right up. She reminded the senator of the community's patriotism and how it has always contributed more than its share of manpower to defend the country in times of conflict. She contrasted Tangier with another Chesapeake Island. Poplar Island, a few dozen miles to the north in Maryland, has been rebuilt with dredge spoil. This, despite it having no human population, Linda Clary said.
And I think this island is more important than Poplar Island, that is housing terrapins and bird flyways with dredge.
Yeah.
Granted, it's another state, but I think the patriots and the veterans of Tangier Island are more important than a flock of birds and a group of turtles.
Right.
And I resent it that we still got to have another study, we got to have this, we got to have that to get anything done. Because we are losing the battle. We are losing the battle, and it's just not fair to people.
In his response, Kaine initially sounded a little taken aback.
Well, your feeling is your feeling, and it should be your feeling, and it is a patriotic island. Uber and I were talking about.
But he eventually recovered, bringing her back to the light at the end of the tunnel. How it would work is that Congress would approve an earmark for Tangier Island. That would be how it gets its funding.
The good news is we finally have a way in the budget to get not just a little bit, but to get a lot. And so we started that. We started it last year, started it back up, and we made Tangier top priority this year. And so far, so good. We're not there yet.
I caught up with Linda Clary afterward to see what she thought of the senator's response and the proposal itself. Let's just say she didn't sound optimistic.
What did you think of what you heard today about the money for Tangier?
Platitudes. We've heard it before. I'm sorry, I hate to be a cynic, but it's like the sign on the bar that says free beer tomorrow. And I appreciate their good intentions, but that doesn't keep us from eroding and disappearing.
Clary isn't sure how much she can afford to wait for help. This was the first year the floodwater had gotten high enough to get into her house.
It's getting progressively worse. It's getting progressively worse. Yards that never flooded are flooding.
As Kaine waited on the dock for the boat to return him to the mainland, I asked him about his earmark method. It feels like a one-time fix. It leaves in place the Army Corps' scoring method that has punished small and rural communities for being small and rural. But at least it's an option now for other communities, Kaine told me.
No, it definitely can, and it's not just the methods that the Corps uses. I mean, FEMA has the same issue. I was just dealing it last week in Appalachia. FEMA has some problems, and we need to roll. Where they don't prioritize disaster relief in these communities that are a small hollow with 40 houses, even if they all get wiped out. So there are problems with these formulas, but the earmark tends to be a way that you can make the case for a smaller community.
I guess then you still need to be politically connected, or at least be the squeaky wheel that gets the grease still.
Right, you do. You have to sit on the appropriators' doorsteps, and Senator Warner and I and Elaine, that's what we do. So
yeah.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
You bet.
Here you go, baby.
So that ended in a hurry. Looking back, I think there was a little misunderstanding when I said you need to be a squeaky wheel. I meant it as a community member in one of these rural places. But I think Senator Kaine took the you as him and other members of Congress needing to make noise to essentially bring home the bacon. Either way, it doesn't sound like a very organized system for doling out federal dollars to communities threatened by flooding and climate change. Places with low incomes, or places where people of color are majorities, these are the ones who have historically struggled to make their voices heard in Washington. Tangier Island is almost exclusively white, but these are people who, by and large, don't make a lot of money. They rear soft-shelled crabs in shanties. They tong oysters from the bottom of the Chesapeake Bay. The older women lead golf cart-based tours around the island for visitors fresh off the ferry boat. For Tangier and other small communities, it seems like there should be a better way. If hearing this makes you feel a little depressed, just think how it must feel to be living it every day. Well, Jonna Yarrington brought her professional skills to bear on that very question, and the anthropologist concluded that there is something much the opposite of hope in Tangier. If she had to sum up in a single word the theme of her work, she said it would be despair.
The institutions are declining in membership, and that's related to the demographic decline and decrease by both by death and by outmigration. And it's also related to the economic situation, the livelihoods on the island, and the ways in which it is or is not regulated to be harvesting seafood from the bay. And that despair embodies itself in depression, anxiety, suicide, and addictions.
Tangier Island is disappearing. A way of life is disappearing. This is the choice we face. Help them stay at great financial expense, or let them go at great cultural expense. Epilogue. About 4 months after my Tangier visit, an email landed in my inbox from Senator Kaine's press office. The final federal omnibus spending bill did include funding for Tangier Island after all. But instead of $25 million, the government would be setting aside $300,000. That money will go toward a feasibility study, a necessary first step in the process, I was told. But all I could think about was free beer tomorrow. Greenfin Studio combines creative design, strategic marketing, and scientific expertise to deliver for our clients. Visit greenfinstudio.com to view their portfolio and ask them how they can help you. Chesapeake Uncharted is brought to you by the Bay Journal, your source for independent environmental news in the Chesapeake region. Production for this episode was by me, Jeremy Cox. The story was edited by Laura Lutz. Our marketing and advertising director is Jackie Kane. You can find more episodes of Chesapeake Uncharted on your favorite streaming service or at ChesapeakeUncharted.com. If you like what you're hearing, sign up for a free Bay Journal news subscription at BayJournal.com. Until next time, this has been Jeremy Cox. Take care.